The episode begins with Randy setting up a surprise for his wife Natalie at their apartment. When his phone rings, he answers it, and Natalie asks him if he has reached the airport, since he was leaving for Hong Kong that night. He lies to her and tells her that he is waiting at the airport lounge, and apologizes to her for missing out on their anniversary. He then asks Natalie if she has left the office. She informs him that she'll be home in 5 minutes. Just then, the TV in their living room turns on by itself. Randy tells his wife goodbye and checks up on the TV. He turns it off and sets up a bouquet of flowers in front of the door to surprise Natalie. All of a sudden, the lights in the other room flicker and then go off. Not thinking much of it, Randy inspects the switchboard and finds that the light button has been turned off. He turns it on and gets back to decorating the apartment. Once again, the light goes out in the other room. As Randy goes to the switchboard to turn the button on again, he senses someone's presence in the dark. When he turns the lights on this time, a dark shadow appears in front of him. He stumbles back and starts screaming as the shadow comes closer to him. Sometime later, Natalie comes home and notices the bouquet waiting for her. She smiles and calls out to Randy. When he does not respond, she walks into the living room and finds Randy sitting on the couch. She calls out to him again, but he still does not respond. Finding this strange, she goes to touch him when all of a sudden his body turns to ash. The next day, Special Agent Broyles is seated at a restaurant. On the table across from him, a child mimics his moves. Broyles entertains the child until he receives a call informing him about a new case. Meanwhile, his team consisting of Special Agents Walter, Peter, and Olivia arrive at the scene. Olivia claims that there were no signs of forced entry, which made the case even more confusing. She turns to Walter and asks him if he has found anything about the crime scene. Walter examines the scene and tells Peter and Olivia that the man was burned with something so hot that his body had held its shape, but he needed to transport the victim's ashes to the lab so that he could take a closer look. Soon Broyles arrives at the scene as well. When Olivia briefs him about it, he asks her if Randy worked at a hospital or had visited one before his death. She informs him that the victim was an investment banker, but she could find out if he had been to the hospital before his death. Broyles reveals that he had witnessed a similar case 4 years ago, where all the victims either worked at or had visited Tyson General Hospital. He was then contacted by the killer, who had offered to turn himself in, only if the detectives were able to break down and understand his formula. Broyles hands Peter a file with the formula on it. Peter tells his team that the formula was a molecular model, but that it was too complex for him to understand. He then leaves so that he can give Walter the file to decipher the formula. Just then, Olivia receives a call where she is told that the victim had visited Latchmere Hospital to see his mother, who was admitted there. The scene changes to Latchmere Hospital, where a nurse is working on her computer. All of a sudden, the same shadow appears behind her as she continues to work. The shadow walks away from her and heads down the hallway undetected. Later that day, Broyles and Olivia arrive at the hospital and ask the chief of staff to show them their employee records, specifically a man of European descent. Back at the lab, Walter examines the remains of the victim when his lab assistant Astrid brings in a device for him. Walter informs Peter and Astrid that he wants to check the ashes for any sign of radiation. However, the device does not show any significant readings indicating that there are no signs of radiation. While he tries to understand what burnt the victim, Olivia calls Peter and asks him about the progress that they may have made. Peter tells her that they have only established that radiation was not used to commit the murders. Then, Walter takes the phone from him and starts talking to Olivia. However, while talking to her, he becomes distracted by the formula and starts working on it. At the hospital, the shadow walks into the room of a woman. A fly lands on her cheek just as the shadow leaves, causing her body to turn into ash as well. When the patient's nurse makes her way into the room, she screams in horror. Hearing the commotion, Olivia and Broyles head towards the room and find the remains of the patient. He asks the officers to lock down the floor, making sure that no patients or staff leave the floor. He then questions the nurse, but she tells him that she has not seen anything. Just then, an officer makes his way towards the agents. He informs them that a hospital employee named Kozlov was of European descent, but had not shown up for his shift that night. Broyles, Peter, and Olivia go to his apartment and break through the front door. They find that the apartment was empty and that he had only recently left in a hurry, leaving behind remains of his equipment. Broyles leaves the apartment and heads back to his office, where he plays the audio call from the killer once again. Once the audio ends, he receives a call from a senator who asks to meet up. When the two of them meet, he tells him that the name Kozlov was an alias that the killer was using and that he was wanted by both the CIA and the Russian government for stealing an important piece of tech. Then, the senator informs Broyles that the CIA will be taking over his case. When Broyles offers departmental transparency in exchange for remaining involved in the case, the senator tells him that the CIA doesn't want the FBI's involvement. Elsewhere, Tomas Kozlov arrives at the motel. He sets up his equipment and leaves once again. Back at the hospital, Olivia and another officer go through security footage at the hospital. Just then, Olivia receives a call from Broyles, who tells her that they will not be backing down from the case and instructs her to avoid leaving a paper trail. Suddenly, the officer calls Olivia over and tells her that she has discovered discovered something. When she goes over the footage, they find the shadow roaming the halls of the hospital. Shocked at the finding, Broyles and Olivia take the footage back for Walter to go through it. When Walter sees the shadow, he tells them that it is a separate entity of its own, something that may have been created by the stolen tech. Later that night, Broyles receives a file from the senator that contains crucial information about Kozlov. He informs Olivia and tells her that the file stated that Kozlov did not steal any tech, but rather his brother. His brother was sent to space on a mission, however it failed and he returned from the mission in a comatose state. This is why Kozlov had been working at the coma units in the hospitals, because he was moving his brother. Only this time his brother's body was still in Lachmere Hospital, which meant that he might be going to retrieve him. The two of them then gather a small team and head towards the hospital. Meanwhile, Walter informs Astrid and Peter that the shadow was passing through the patients' bodies in search of radiation, causing the bodies to disintegrate as it left. This meant that the entity was going after patients who had recently gone through radiation therapy. At the hospital, lights go off inside the coma ward. A nurse goes to manually check up on the patients. Kozlov shows up behind her and sedates her, so that he can unplug his brother and move him to the motel room. A few moments later, Broyles and Olivia arrive at the coma ward but find the sedated nurse and the missing body of Kozlov's brother. Then they head back to the lab, where Walter tells them that Kozlov's brother might have brought something back with him from outer space. An organism that was capable of projecting itself, without leaving the host's body and presenting itself in another form. At the motel, Kozlov hooks his brother up to machines while playing his answering machine. He listens to the voicemail left by Broyles, who tells him to call him back, since they have solved his formula. All of a sudden, the TV in the room turns on, alerting Kozlov of the shadow emerging. He immediately delivers a high-voltage current to his brother to contain the shadow. Once the shadow returns back to his brother's body, he stops the current and finds that his heart is still beating. Before he can be relieved, the shadow once again begins to emerge, forcing him to shock his brother again until the shadow disappears. At the lab, Astrid sets up a monitor so that they can track the phone call. When Kozlov calls, he informs Broyles that he will hang up the phone in a few seconds so that they cannot track him. He then questions him about the formula. At the same time, Walter calls and tells them that he has solved the formula. He had discovered that it was not possible to remove the entity from the body without killing the host. Broyles informs Kozlov about their findings. Before he can respond, the shadow passes through him and turns him into ash as well. Since the line had remained open, the team was able to trace his location. Early the next morning, they arrive at the motel and find Kozlov's ashes and his brother's body inside the van. Walter tells the team that he does not know how to contain the shadow, but they will need a container large enough to hold it. Just then, they hear a scream from a motel room. Broyles quickly shoots Kozlov's brother in the head, causing the shadow to return to its host's body. They contain the shadow along with the host's body and take it away. The scene changed to a few days later. Two patrol cars surround another car. The officers surround the car and demand for the kidnappers inside to step out of the vehicle. The kidnappers nervously step out of the car with their hands raised and get on their knees. They inform the officers that they don't know what they are getting into. The female officer asks the kidnapped boy inside the car if he is okay, and he nods to confirm that he is fine. However, no one takes them seriously. All of a sudden, one of the officers begins moving backwards. His partner calls out to him, but he is unable to respond. He keeps going backwards until he reaches the edge of a building and falls to his death. The other officers watch in horror, when all of a sudden the female officer shoots all of the police officers before shooting herself in the head. The next day, the FBI team shows up at the crime scene. They go through security footage and identify the young boy as a 15-year-old named Tyler. Then, Olivia informs Walter that the bodies of the officers are being transported to his lab. He tells her that he already has a theory on what happened. He deduces that hypnosis and mesmerism were probably involved in the crime. Then, Peter tells the team that he has found the boy's father, Dr. Carson, who worked at a company called Massive Dynamic. The team makes their way to their office building where they meet with Dr. Carson and Nina Sharp. Olivia questions Dr. Carson and asks him why he did not contact the police. He tells her that he did not even know that his son had been kidnapped until the kidnappers called him. He explained that the two of them had become estranged. Olivia then asks what the kidnappers told him. Dr. Carson tells her that they only asked him to wait for further instructions. Peter turns his attention towards Nina and asks her if she is sure that the two kidnappers were not her employees. She informs him that she cross-referenced their names across their employee database and found nothing and they were not involved with her clients. Olivia concludes that the kidnappers might have been trying to extort secrets from the company since Dr. Carson worked with highly sensitive information regarding military aircraft. He also tells the agents that Tyler's mother died when he was very young, and the boy is entirely dependent on him. Hearing this, Walter walks out of the room. Peter checks up on him and asks him if everything is okay. He tells him that he was reminiscing about how he met his mother. Meanwhile, Tyler tells the kidnappers that he is hungry. They arrive at a convenience store where one of them goes up to the cash register and asks the clerk to empty the cash register. When the clerk notices that the kidnapper does not have a gun in his hands, so he does not take him seriously. Then Then, another man at the store approaches the kidnapper and asks him if there is a problem. The kidnapper tells him that he should not have gotten involved. Just when the man is about to attack the kidnapper, he stops. He then grabs a pot of boiling coffee and pours it over his head. He then smashes the glass pot over his head and goes through another glass window and loses consciousness. The clerk pulls out a gun and points it at the kidnapper, as Tyler and the other kidnapper walk out. The man tells the clerk that he should have just given him the money. Just then, the clerk puts the gun down and picks a key and plugs it into a socket, electrocuting himself in the process. Sometime later, the team arrives at the convenience store and goes through the security footage. Olivia tells Peter that the only two witnesses are in intensive care and will not be able to give any statements. At that moment, Broyles calls Olivia and tells her that the two kidnappers are Hickey and Dobbins. They worked at a car dealership and were good salesmen. There is nothing out of the ordinary about the kidnappers, only that they left for lunch one day and never returned. Peter suggests that they may be spies trying to get information about the US military. Back at the lab, Walter and Astrid perform an autopsy on one of the dead police officers. Walter tells Astrid that he is trying to look for lesions on their brains that would indicate what had happened to them. When the rest of the team shows up at the lab, Walter tells them that hypnosis only affects the brain waves. However, the police officers had an extreme case of suggestion, which meant that there were lesions on their brains. He shows them hematomas on the officers' brains and explains that this could mean that their minds and body were in conflict. In theory, the officers were under mind control. Olivia asks Walter to work on a way to prevent mind control. At Massive Dynamic, Broyles and other agents set up their equipment to track the kidnapper's phone call. Sure enough, Dr. Carson receives a call from his son who tells him to give the kidnappers whatever they want. Then, the kidnappers take over the call and instruct Dr. Carson to deliver $2 million at a set location. However, they hang up the phone before the call could be traced. The FBI agents think that the money is only a distraction and that they are after something much bigger. Olivia tells Dr. Carson that they are going to set a trap so that they are prepared. At the lab, Walter finds a teddy bear that generates white noise, similar to being inside a uterus, which will stop the kidnappers from being able to control anyone's mind. Then, the team assembles a team and Walter gives them all headphones with white noise playing. He tells them that they will only be able to communicate with the team leader through microphones. Olivia advises them to shoot the kidnappers only if they have a clear shot. Everyone arrives at the location and takes their positions. Dr. Carson waits for the kidnappers to make contact and soon, a man walks out and snatches the briefcase from him. Olivia tells everyone to run after the suspect, when a car suddenly emerges from a warehouse and crashes, causing it to explode on impact. Olivia, who had fallen to get away from the car, gets up and enters the warehouse. There, she finds one of the kidnappers with a gun pointing under his chin. He asks her to help him. The scene changes to Walter and Peter. Peter notices the suspect running away with the briefcase and leaves, before asking Walter to stay in his position. He puts on his headphones and runs towards the suspect but immediately stops. He notices Tyler standing across from him. Tyler tells Peter to get rid of the headphones, since they are useless against his mind control. He then commands Peter to take him away in his car and Peter complies. Back at the warehouse, Olivia asks the officers to keep looking for Tyler. Just then, Walter comes up to her and asks her where Peter is. The kidnapper tells the agents that Tyler made them do everything that they had done, and that Peter might be in real danger. Meanwhile, Tyler tells Peter to stop fighting against his commands or he will continue to get headaches as his brain tries to catch up. Peter stops fighting and tells Tyler that his father is worried about him, but he does not seem concerned. When Peter tries stopping the car, Tyler commands him to drive as fast as he can, nearly killing them in the process. At Massive Dynamic, Olivia confronts Nina and tells her that the son of one of her top scientists, being able to control minds is not a coincidence. Nina tells Olivia that Dr. Carson was working on a project with a pharmaceutical company, where pilots were given drugs to amplify their brain waves and help them fly planes using their thoughts. Dr. Carson reveals that he had taken the drugs home for further research, but Tyler must have taken them. Walter tells him that the drug, along with ADD medication that Tyler was taking, and puberty reacted with his brain waves and gave him the ability to control people's minds. Back in the car, Peter and Tyler notice a patrol car behind them. Tyler orders Peter to pull over. When the officer asks Peter to step out of the vehicle, Tyler uses mind control on the officer and he places his gun in front of Peter. Tyler then makes Peter pick up the gun and point it towards the officer. Peter begs Tyler to not kill him and only knock him out. Tyler agrees and Peter knocks out the officer. At the Massive Dynamic office, Olivia tells all state troopers to stay away from Peter and Tyler. She then gets called into Nina's office where Broyles tells her that Tyler has been labeled as a threat to national security and that the fringe team has been ordered to step down. Olivia does not agree with this decision and tells them that Peter might become collateral. However, Broyles tells her that the government is assuming that Tyler has a foreign handler, which means that their national security might be at risk of breach. Olivia talks to Walter, who has been shaken up by Peter's kidnapping. She and Nina convince Walter to come up with a plan to stop Tyler. He tells them that he can use an EMF scrambler to mess with Tyler's brain waves. Astrid informs Olivia that Tyler's search history indicated that he was looking for a woman. When Olivia questions Dr. Carson, he tells her that the woman he had been searching for was his mother. At the time of his birth, she had been on drugs and would often abandon Tyler until she finally disappeared one day. So when Tyler questioned him about his mother, he told him that she died in a car wreck. Meanwhile, Tyler takes Peter to a club. Peter asks him what made him hate his father. He tells him that he had lied to him his whole life. Peter tries telling him that his mother may not want to see him anymore, but this does not sit well with him, and he forces Peter to pick up a knife and almost stab his leg. The next morning, Olivia visits Walter and asks him if he has a plan on how to stop Tyler. He informs her that he is building an electromagnetic field that will scramble Tyler's brain waves and make him disoriented. This will give the agents a small window to take Tyler down. At the same time, Tyler and Peter arrive at his mother's house. There, he hugs her and then tells her that he blames his father for keeping the two of them away, and that they can now be together. She tries to tell Tyler that his father had not kept her away when her husband shows up. Tyler realizes that his mother does not want to leave because she now has a husband. He gets Peter to pick up a gun and point it towards his stepfather. At that moment, Olivia and Broyles arrive at the house. Broyles enters through the front door and tries to shock Tyler. However, Tyler manages to get up and gets Peter to shoot Broyles. He then makes Peter get back inside the car and start driving. Olivia, Astrid, and Walter chase after Peter and Tyler. Walter activates the electromagnetic field, causing Tyler to become disoriented and lose his control over Peter. Peter crashes the car so that Tyler can be caught. He is sedated and taken to the hospital. He waits for the effects of the drug to wear off so that he can lose the ability to control mind. This episode ends with Nina updating a man named Will about the Tyler mind control experiment. She tells him that the experiment was a success. However, she is shutting it down due to the heavy consequences of one of the Tylers losing control.